interested in art. I mean, probably from my first art class officially was probably junior high school, and just something that I really connected with at that point, and knew that I wanted to be involved in some way with it. And I had a very influential painting teacher. He took electives, and painting was one of my electives, and he was had a big influence on me, and so I kind of turned in that direction. So I actually got an undergraduate degree in drawing and painting.
Okay.
But as I pursued that, and again taking electives, I took a pottery class.
Okay.
And just really connected with it.
And what college was that?
This was at Southern Miss.
Southern Miss.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another professor at the time had a big influence, taught pottery, and he was also into art education. And so he offered me, if I wanted to continue on, a fellowship, which basically he paid for my school.
Okay.
And a little bit to do some lower level teaching.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and at that point kind of switched over with emphasis in ceramics.
And more aiming towards instructional.
Yeah. Education, and with emphasis in ceramics. So then I graduated and began teaching pretty quick after that. I was able to get a job. Taught a year at part-time at a junior college down in Pearl River County, and then the next year got on full-time at the one I stayed at for 30 years, which was Jones College. It's in Ellisville, Mississippi. Not long before I got out of, or retired, decided I wanted to retire, that I got interested in bonsai. So I had been interested before, but I was teaching a night class, and a guy, I say before, probably when I was in my 20s, I had an interest, but it wasn't much there. I mean, there was no internet then. And there was nobody around in this part of the country that knew anything about it. If I found out somebody went to Japan, I asked them about it, and they, they didn't know. They didn't go for bonsai. They were sightseeing or whatever.
And I was gonna see, how long were you doing just regular arts and ceramics?
Oh, from the time I finished college till probably 15 years ago.
Okay, so you've been doing bonsai pottery for a little bit of time now.
Yeah, about 15 years or so.
Yeah. Where did that interest kind of come up from? What were you looking at the time?
I was looking at an easy way to get pots for myself, for my trees.
Okay.
I bought well, let me back up a little bit. I was teaching a night class, and I had a guy come in, and this was usually adults, and he was an older gentleman, and I was asking everybody what they were interested in, what they would like to make, and he mentioned bonsai pots, and I'm like, oh, well, So that's really kind of what retworked my interest. So I get in talking to him, he was just beginning, but he knew about Brussels, and he had some magazines that he brought me and let me look at. And so I kind of started helping him, and I had not at that point made one for myself, and I didn't have any trees even at that point. But he mentioned Brussels, and I was up that way shortly after that. Went by, bought a couple of little things, and so the journey kind of began. When I went and bought some nursery trees and wanted to put those into pots, and there wasn't a market around here that carried any trees. There wasn't any market at all. So natural thing for me to do was make a pot. So I started making a few for myself, and that's kind of where it began. It's kind of a curse in a way, and I say a curse. I enjoy making the pots. I would be working in clay to some extent, no matter what I was doing. But it really makes my trees suffer.
Yeah.
I spend more time making pots and less time fooling with trees. So.
And I guess that's something I would want to ask too, is like the balance of your passion for bonsai, obviously, versus being a potter. I mean, you still kind of cultivate your own little collection, but at the same time, you're also fulfilling orders or looking further, and like you need to get inspirations from different sources to know what people like and what people want nowadays.
Exactly, and that's the thing that in work, going from my trees and my pots to clients' pots, you have to ask a lot of questions, ask for a lot of information from them as to what kind of tree they have, what if they have a vision, have they seen something that they like? If they have, can they send me a picture of it? Not necessarily that I'm gonna make something just like that, but to get an idea of what they envision. Sometimes, I will say, I don't think that's the way you want to go.
So you kind of give them this honest.
Yeah, I try to maybe lead them in a different direction, as far as shape, size, or whatever.
So kind of give me like a walkthrough then of person places an order and expectations of a time frame that you usually.
Okay, well, I'm working with a guy right now. He's I hadn't started on the pots, but we're still in that
beginning stage.
He's texted me some pictures. I text him some pictures of some pots and some glazes and so forth, and he's kind of we've gone through that, and this is over. I probably started the conversation with him 2 months ago, and so I work out the sizes and that he wants. Everything shrinks, so I have to compensate for that and make sure that I make that big enough so that when it's fired and shrinks down, it's the right size. And then I'll start. And so from the time I get on the wheel, or if it's a slab build or whatever, wherever I start, it's probably 2 days, not constant, but maybe a couple hours one morning, a couple hours the next morning to get it put together. Then once it's put together, then I need to dry it down to a certain point, and then go in and kind of do finish work, just clean up, make sure that everything's level and smooth,
and for those who don't know, it goes from the drying point to a bisque firing. And which that, if not all the rough edges and all the sharp corners are smoothed down, that can cause issues.
Yeah, you have to kind of work in stages. There's basically 3 while you're working on, or can work on the clay and change it, and that's the plastic state, and that's where it's really malleable, and you can change the directions and things like that. And then as the moisture begins to leave it, it gets to a leather hard point. And at that point, it still has moisture in it, but it's stiffer. It's more rigid, and you can then kind of manhandle a little bit, is what I call it. You would now probably do some, kind of scrape work or knife work on it, whereas before you might just be using soft plastic tools and sponges. Once you get it to that leather hard state, that's kind of where you finish it up and get it like you want it. The smooth, the marks out of it, or marks in it, whatever you want. And then you let it dry. And that can take, depending on its size, days or weeks. And once you get it dry, then it goes in the kiln, and you heat it up. That's called a bisque firing. That drives all the residual moisture out and changes the composition of the clay. It's more rock-like now. It won't dissolve in water. You can break it, it's fragile, but it's
very absorbent still.
very absorbent, yeah. If you put it in water, it would soak in water, but it won't. The water won't break it down like it would before.
Yeah.
Then you put take it out of the kiln, apply a glaze to it, and the glaze is just different chemicals that are compounded, kind of like a recipe. In fact, they're referred to as recipes to get various effects, whether it's glossy or not glossy, whether it's brown or blue or green or white or whatever. Different chemicals go into it.
There's a couple of examples of those.
Chemicals?
Yeah.
Well, main ingredient would be silica, a feldspar, and usually you have something called a flux, which can vary, but a flux makes those other two melt and form the glass. So you have things like nepheline or zinc oxides, whatever, to make that reaction start at the temperature you want. And then you add things like iron or tin or copper or cobalt. That gives you different colors. Tin was white. Iron is anything from a creamy color to a dark chocolate brown, depending on the amount you put in it. Cobalt is blue, gives you blues. From a light to dark, again, depending on the percentage you put in there. And then you have copper is green. And you have some that I don't use too much, but nickel, manganese, different things that can create different colors and effects in the glaze.
Yeah, and I heard you mention it to a glass, because basically it's going from that. Yeah,
it's a powder, or all these things are, you buy them in powder form. You mix them, weigh them out in the proportions, mix them with the water to a kind of a creamy consistency, heavy cream, and then they're applied to the surface. And because this pot is porous, when you can dip it in there, you can paint it on with a brush, you can spray it on it. The water soaks into the clay and pulls those particles to the surface. And you know, you have to be gentle with them. You can rub them off, but if you're careful, you can handle those. And then when they go back into the kiln, through that heating process, they begin to melt and form that glass. Obviously, probably the most important thing in a pot, other than its shape, is to have the drainage holes in it. And you know how many, where they're located. You know, I've never seen any information that I've run across, or any potter that I've seen talk about it, and I've seen a lot of people talk about it.
Like there's set rules of how
there's
many
set rules,
pools.
where they are, how many there are, anything like that. Everybody kind of has their own idea, and I kind of wing it, and I say that in that I look at the volume. And kind of go on that. As you know, if it were a bigger pot, I'd probably have certainly more holes than this. You know, if it came on out like this, I'd probably have at least 2 more holes in it. I like to put wiring holes and put those near in this case, the corners.
Yeah, so they're
and so that allows somebody to really some options. The training that I had as far as wiring in trees was to use 4-wire as much as you could. Well, and one other thing about the wire-in holes, I like to put them. You know, if you get a real in the South, you get some extended rain periods too, and some people will elevate one end of their pot and
let it run off,
let it drain down. So that's one reason I like to have holes near the edge.
Okay, I thought it was just purely just to hide them under the feet too.
Well, and that it serves that purpose too, is that you don't see the wire
coming out
normally if it's under the feet or near the feet. But and then the feet of course lift the pot up so that the air, you do have air circulation under there, and again in the South, that's important that you have that cooling effect
Mm-hmm.
this time of year particularly, but also have that air exchange and water exchange.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if it's set flat, the water couldn't drain out
Yeah, of course.
quickly as it could.
Mm-hmm.
The aesthetics of the feet, again, that's kind of, some people like to put a lot of time in feet, and it's not that I don't like to, I just find myself not doing it, but in other words, they will put a lot of decoration on them.
Yeah.
Cloud designs and so forth. Yeah, okay, these are a little different. These actually have a little cloud effect on them, but they're a little bit more strips that are cut and just pinched down on each side to attach them. And probably excess, but again, I put wire in holes because on a pot like this, you've got a lot of options as far as
and that's
how you
kind
arrange
of that's kind of like either like a Kusamuno planter or a Bunjing planter.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, like you said, that you need all these different angles because you might come from one side of the pot or another side. You might come from the center.
Yeah.
Just one thing to keep in mind: an excellent bonsai pot always has all those options.
Yeah.
Question for you is: where do you see American bonsai pottery going from here? Because you've been in the game for, like you said, 15 years.
When I began, and part of it may be, naivete on my part, was that there wasn't a lot of people doing it. I mean, I'm aware there are people that have been doing it, Nick Lentz and various Max Beaverman, Beaverman, I think, I know he's passed. But anyway, people that are not necessarily big time, but have been producing a good while. And I know people have experimented along there, but when I got into it, I kind of got into it with the idea that things were, to use an analogy, it's like a frame on a painting, the pot is. It's to complement it and go with it, and not become dominant of it.
So you think people are more willing to experiment now as American potters emerge?
That's really getting to is that people, and part of that was kind of, quiet colors, muted colors.
As opposed to
unglazed.
Like the Chinese and Japanese pottery.
The traditional Japanese, Chinese bonsai pots, except for the smaller accent where they use brighter colors. But people are tending to really experiment a lot more now. And one of the orders this new client has is not a big oval, but an oval and a fire engine red.
Yeah, that's a dramatic color.
Yeah, that's a very strong color.
And we were talking about a club. We were talking in a club meeting last night about how to pair a tree with a piece of pottery, and it's the pot, like you said, is a frame. It should never overwhelm. It should always complement. But with people using these brighter and brighter colors, does that mean that also the experimentation with different species is kind of we're pushing the limits a little bit?
Yeah, and I think it's part of probably the American search for something that's a little different from the traditional Japanese, Chinese style.
And I think that's what it is too, is that Japanese is a little bit more calm, serene, in harmony with nature, whereas the American way is kind of a little bit more loud.
Certainly beginning to look that way.
It's loud pieces.
And I'm going to say that's in the last 5 or 6 years that I see it. A lot. And this is a technique that I do use a good bit, and it's particularly a technique that I use in workshops when I do those build your own pot technique, and that's doing extrusion. And extrusion is just a piece of clay that has been forced through an opening in a die, and this is an example of a die. This part right here is this profile of this pot right here.
And you had that made
I had
yourself
these made.
custom.
And the reason I have 2 of them because they charge you the same amount for if I had one hole or two holes.
Yeah, you could
So
do multiple.
I utilize it. So when I extrude and I just want this, I just lay something over this side, and the clay
Naturally just pushes
goes
through
here.
where it goes.
I use a little piece of metal, not a block of wood. But anyway, so I can block that side out and just extrude from here, or block this side and just extrude here.
Yeah.
So this is just an extruder. It's just a metal tube. It has a end cap that screws on and off, so I can put the die, that's the piece that has the hole in it, inside of this cap and then screw it on. And then you would drop your clay in here, and then bring this arm around with a plunger attached, and then just pull down on the arm, and it forces the clay through that opening.
And it makes a pretty long piece. You can, that whole arm swing gets a pretty long piece.
Yeah.
So
you can see it gives you your profile there, the same as I was working with over there.
Yeah.
So anyway, these are extrusions, and as you saw already, maybe we from how that was done.
Yeah.
These are as well, and so you can make multiple sizes, rectangles, squares, hexagon, pentagon, whatever you want to make. This is the die for these, and I made this one myself. It's a piece of plexiglass, and so I just cut the profile that I wanted, the hole that I wanted, and the clay then forced through there. So it's a quick way of getting a profile to a side. I mean, you can design this band in here, the lip on it, the size of the lip, so forth.
Yeah, and that's really useful for like production pottery too.
Yeah, I mean, and particularly with the workshops, and that we can, in a couple of hours, we can build somebody a pot, or they can build a pot, and I can help them, and it gets all the features that you want in the pot.
Yep.
As far as the lip, maybe a design in the side, and the depth and size and so forth. So to do this, I've cut a little guide or jig which gives you the proper angles for the pot. Now this was going to be like a six-sided pot like this. So I've cut the angles in there, I've extruded the clay, we'll stand the clay up, and then I just began to cut pieces. Can make a cut there, make a cut here. Cut, cut. So here's the pieces, all 6 of them. Let me get this one out of the way here. Okay, we want to assemble this, and so when you're adding pieces of clay to pieces of clay, in other words, we want to join these 2 pieces together. So what you want to do is to prepare these edges where they're going to join. And this is called a rib, but it's just a thin piece of metal with serrations on the edge. And I'm going to scratch this. Now there's a lot of different things you can use. You could use a needle, you could use a knife. I mean, you could do it with this. It just takes a lot longer.
Yeah.
So we got each of those scored, and so what I've got in this jar, just some water with a little bit of clay in it that is dissolved in it. And so I'm going to wet each of these corners now. A little bit of that solution on each one. Now by scratching it, I always said that it kind of made it like Velcro, and that the particles would kind of lock together. You can do it. I've seen people do it with just putting moisture on there. And if your clay is really soft, you can do that.
And it almost just kind of stick together.
But
in leather hard form like this, yeah.
But yeah, if it's gotten where it's kind of dry like this, see, that's kind of firm. It's not bending. You better score it good. So
Yeah. Okay.
what I'm doing here is I've got these sides added together, and I've got a little fresh clay, a little plastic clay that I'm just putting into each corner here to give it a little reinforcement. It's just a little bead of clay, kind of like caulking, if you want to think of it that way. That I'm kind of caulking the corners, which just gives a little more support.
And that clay that you're using to fill those gaps, that clay is still fresh. It's still very moist.
It's softer plastic clay. It's really, I can do a lot of things with it, bend it around and mash it and do things. Okay, I've caulked the inside of each corner here, and so need a bottom on the pot now. So this is where the slab comes in. We're going to roll a slab now, and the slabs are used mainly for bottoms of ovals, and slab built pieces, of course, are made from slabs. This is produced by a company called Bailey. They make wheels and kills and all kind of things. But it has a adjustable knob here and a dial over here that I can see the thickness. I put my clay between these two, or this piece of canvas, and then simply turn, and it feeds through there and squishes the clay down into a slab. Pull it out this end, pull the clay back, and there's your slab of clay effect. Now what I like to do is just take this and roll it over. Make sure my seams at the top are joined well. See, I was kind of putting it together upside down. So this is actually the top. You can see the lip profile here. And so this will go here. Now, what I'll do now is just take this knife and mark the outside edges of the bottom. And what this will tell me is where I need to score to add this to this. So I take my scoring tool now. And also the bottom here. Again, pieces to pieces need to be scored. It's just an old toothbrush I'm using here. You could use a paintbrush or whatever.
I would say another improvisation tool.
Yeah, another improvisation, another freebie. Something you don't have to buy.
Don't throw all your toothbrushes away.
Yeah. So again, put those down, scored, add moisture, kind of firmly put that in contact with the other, and I'm going to do the same kind of caulking around that edge where those two meet. So take that plastic clay again, roll it out into a little rope or coil, and then just work that in with my fingertip. It is a quick process, and again, that's kind of why I chose it to do the workshops with. I mean, I'm not the first person in the world to do this by any means.
So this is a potter's practice. So if you see a lot of rectangle shaped pots with very, very nice sharp corners and very good straight walls, this is normally how it's accomplished.
It could be. Yeah.
I've also seen some potters actually build from scratch too, and that's
Sure, yeah, where you just take a flat slab and cut it into your pieces and put those together. But here very quickly you got the basic structure of your pot. Now there's a lot of work that needs to be done as far as cleaning and smoothing edges and refining, and then of course adding the feet. Drainage holes need to be put in, wiring holes. Feet can be added in a lot of different ways of doing feet. It could be pieces of clay cut here that are shaped, sized, and added to the edges. You could take balls of clay, that can be done, can be added, attached, and become a foot. So a lot of things can be done, a lot of variations can be done, and it's, you know, other than making the extrusions, it's a simple process. It doesn't take a lot of time. A few tools, few simple tools, a knife, scoring.
And for cutting the hole in the bottom, do you have a tool that you
Sure,
use
let me grab one of those for you real quick. And for cutting the larger holes, I just went to Lowe's, and these are just pipe
pipe fit
fittings.
pieces? Yeah, that's like sweat-on copper pieces.
Yeah, copper pieces. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be copper, but I picked this one up because it had two sizes,
two variations.
I don't know if it's 3/4 and a half or whatever, but I usually do that before I add the feet because I like to just take it and push it through. Kind of find the center in this case and just push down. It's like making biscuits, or
yeah, like cutting out the cookies for the
Just makes a nice clean hole. The wiring holes I usually put on after I do the feet. So I would do this, then I'd add the feet, and then I would take, this is a little piece of, actually it's aluminum arrow shaft. Okay, I don't know if they even still make these anymore, but I knew a fella that made arrows and sold bows and so forth. So they would cut them to a person's draw length. But it's real thin aluminum, but it's a strong type of aluminum. I cut it like a hypodermic needle's cut. So you just take it and push and twist, and
it makes a perfect little
little hole out. It makes a perfect little hole in there.
Awesome.
So with this one, we're going to try. It's a little soft, and I'm not guaranteeing. Normally, I would let this dry some, but not to the extent of this. But what we're trying to do here is, and I could do this without it, but I've got a little piece of foam, and I'm just going to use that as a guide to wrap this extrusion around. And this is the clay when it's really in a plastic. You see how flimsy it is, how much it wants to warp and move around.
Easily take your fingerprint to it.
Yeah, you could easily just pinch right through it. So the little foam core there is just a guide to kind of help hold it in a position I want it. And then I'm going to cut this excess off, bring this out, take this little excess piece out. Again, I'm going to score those edges. Add my moisture on there and put those together. So I'm showing you this to show you that there are other options than just making rectangles or pentagons or hexagons or whatever with extrusions. And you see some, and again, this, to me, this is a kind of a hybrid slab technique. It's a slab with that flat piece of clay, cutting, building this, a piece like this with a lip on it. That would be twice as much work if I were working with slab, because each lip would be a piece on each section. So that's 6 sides, 6 lips, you know. This, just by having it all together, the lip and the side, it speeds everything up.
And yeah, you can see like making that round took even less time.
Oh yeah.
So you just put it straight on the...
What I would do here would be let this sit a little while and let it stiffen up to almost this stage here, where I cut those pieces. And that would allow me, if I try to pick this up now, it's just kind of...
It's going to be all wobbly.
It's like, you know, holding a worm, you know.
It has to get back to that leather hard stage before it's workable.
Yeah, let it get leather hard. Then all I got to do is take my slab and flip it over, attach it, and I've got a bottom. Now, what I could do also is I'd probably wait till this got a little harder, but I could let it firm up a little bit and then pull it out into
an oval if you wanted to. And
so I've got that option.
Something that...
Okay, so what I thought I'd do is throw and show you how I do a round pot, and then how I do an oval, or it could be a soft rounded square, whatever. I take these bats, and this just allows me to, when I finish working, this attaches to the wheel head, stays stable there, and work on that. And when I get finished with it, I can pick this up, move it, get another one, put it in place, and make another piece. Okay, well, I've got a piece of clay here. This is about 2.5 pounds, and I've wedged it up. That's the process of working it, kneading it like dough to get the imperfections out of it, any hard lumps or anything like that, or any air pockets that may be in it. And then attach that to the wheel head just by slapping it down and kind of patting it into somewhat of a symmetrical shape on the wheel. Now, I have a pedal here, and it works like an accelerator. The further I mash, the faster the wheel goes. See how quiet this wheel is?
Oh yeah, and you can't even hear it.
Yeah.
Some of them have a real noticeable hum, whereas that one's...
So what I do now is just water in the bucket here, or container, and I start pressing on the clay, first downward and then kind of upward. And this is called coning it, because it kind of looks like an upside down ice cream cone, I guess. But it's part of the process, and then what I do is center the top and then increase the pressure downward, and gathering up the clay as I go, adding water as I need it, and then when I get back to this position, hope to have the clay centered where it's perfectly symmetrical, not wobbling. Wobbling would be like that, but I want it nice and even like that. I have sponges here, a few tools. I'll kind of explain those as I pick them up, but just to kind of keep things a little neat, and as you work, sponge it off. Now, what I'll do here initially is I'll make the sides for an oval. This will become an oval pot if I wanted it to be. And so what I'm going to do here is just open this clay and just pushing downward, making a hole in it. But I'm going to go all the way to the bat, this surface here. I'm not leaving any clay in the bottom. and then I'm going to expand this out. What I'm doing here is pulling toward me. You see the hole get bigger, and the clay getting wider and wider. So just continue bringing this out. Now I could stop anywhere along here, but I'm just going to go all the way out to the edge of the bat. This would give me the biggest diameter, which would give me the biggest pot. Now this leaves a little clay in the bottom here against the bat, just a thin layer where my finger goes across there. I like to clean that off again, just something I do. You wouldn't have to, but it's what I do. Now what I want to do is put pressure on this ring here, and it's called pulling, but I'm going to press and lift, and it's going to draw the clay upward. Now that's about as much as I want to thin it. That's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of a 1/4 inch thick, 3/16 to a quarter. Now you can see the rings in the side. That's where my fingers press on it. Probably on a bonsai pot you wouldn't want to leave those. I mean you could, but it just depends. Certainly not on every pot. These are called ribs. They're just pieces of a plastic type, rubberized plastic type material. Some of them are softer than others, and they're used for shaping and smoothing. If you want to smooth the inside of a bowl, of course you'd use this rounded part here. Something straight like the outside here. But what I'm going to use is this yellow one, which is a little stiffer than the red one, and I'm going to hold it against that as I press on the inside against there, and I'm going to get those finger marks out.
And it's kind of like a preference. It's how handmade do you want to leave
Exactly.
the clay looking.
Some people, really go to the extreme where it almost looks like it's mold made, and I don't like to get it to that point. I like to somebody know that I touched the clay. I don't mind leaving finger marks. I tend to leave them more on the inside. Again, that's something you're not going to see with the tree planted and soil in it. So it's not something I worry about then. But I do tend to worry about the outside or work on the outside to remove that. And they put a ridge in it to kind of almost like a little finial below the lip there, which kind of says, this is the top of it, it's the end of it. It tends to, when you fire something, the glaze tends to be a slightly different color there because of the thickness of the glaze, and I think it just gives it a finished look that you wouldn't get otherwise. Now, this is just a simple, I'll pick it up, we can put it back if I want to. But give you a little bit of idea of the profile of it. Is that too high?
No, that's good.
Okay. Now, if this was where I was like, that's where I want to stop, then what I would do is set this aside. If I were making more, just set it aside, grab another bat, another piece of clay. But just as far as making an oval out of it, what I would do is let this become some slightly leather hard. I don't want to try to distort it now. Again, it's too soft, too floppy. So I let this dry a little bit, and where it begins to firm up just slightly, and then I'm going to cut it loose from this bat. And I can slip a knife under there, that thin bladed knife, or I can take a wire and cut under there and remove it. Let me show you what the wiring process looks like. If I've got a wire, I usually do that pretty quick, like while it's still soft. Yeah, there's one right there. If you don't mind. Thank you. And this is just a thin braided wire and with 2 handles on it, so I'm just going to wrap it to get it a little shorter. I'll catch it right at the edge of the pot here and pull it under the pot or under the clay and against the bat. Now again, I wouldn't want to pick that up now, but what it's going to do is when it dries, I'll be able to just lift this off of there.
And we do have an example.
Pretty easy.
Yeah.
And a little effort. And I thought I'd throw a round pot if someone ordered a round pot. And there's not really a lot of difference in the process other than where this one I didn't leave a bottom in it. I will leave a bottom in this one. Now this is about 2.5 pounds of clay. Excuse me. But since it's got a bottom in it, I would not be able to make it as wide because I used all the clay to make the walls. Here I've got to make the bottom and the walls. Now what I have to do is I open this up, is stop at some point rather than continuing on to the bat. And what you have to do is at some point judge and see how much clay you have down here. How thick is your bottom? Is it too thin or is it too thick? If it's too thick, you need to thin it down. If it's too thin, there's ways of making it a little thicker. So what essentially do is take it and just stick it in through the clay, put your finger on it, and then pull it out and see how much needle you have there. And that gives you a gauge for the thickness of your bottom. And if it's what you want, then what you do is very similar. You begin to bring those sides out again like you did the first time. But again, you can't bring it out too far because you're going to run out of clay if you do. And what I'm doing now is just smoothing that bottom off, and kind of compressing the clay, making sure it's even. So now I'm going to do the same thing as I did here and pull this clay up and make the walls of the pot. Or pulling it. Now stop a little bit before I get to the top. I don't want to come off of that. I want to leave a little extra clay here to make a lip or an accent there. And do one more pull and thin that down. Everything's kind of based off, of course, a cylinder. And so, working on the wheel, everything's going to be round. But, is it straight? Is it wider at the top, narrow at the bottom? What do you want to do with it? So,
That's all stuff that you do on the wheel.
Don't want to commit too much too quick. You can get a lot of options now. I can make this bowl shaped. I can leave it, actually leave it straight if I wanted to.
I guess kind of just do like just massage it out and make like almost like a rounded edge shape too.
Yeah, sure, yeah. So all we're going to do is we'll use softer rib, hold it against the side here, and I'm going to increase the pressure from the inside, pushing outward. Make it, the top is one thing, flare that back out, make a lip on it, leave it constricted on the inside like that. Let's pull it out and see what we can do there. Put a little lip on it. Yeah, I'm just using my little finger here as kind of a steadying point and rolling the clay back over it. I make a lot of pots this shape. I like this shape.
Yeah, I was about to say that's one of my more favorite shapes that I've seen you make a lot of your pottery.
Some people call it a purse style.
A purse?
I've heard it referred to as a purse style. Yeah.
That's okay.
Kind of feminine to begin with, I guess. And
it is a feminine shape, especially if you leave it around.
Yeah.
So.
And you can while it's still soft, do indentions in it, and
yeah.
There's a lot of things you can alter the top a little bit.
Do a striping, or like you said, or push it in.
But that's pretty much that process. And people see this and they think, well, it didn't take long. When I was not long out of school and at a craft show, I had never been exposed to much glass work, and there was a guy had a display of blown glass pieces, and I asked him, I was looking at a piece that's really just caught my eye, and he was chatting with me. I said, how long did it take you to do that? And he said, about 25 years.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah, okay.
That's the whole thing, is the mastery of it.
Yeah.
2, 3.
All right, here's a piece, a round piece that I threw yesterday. It's got a bottom in it. It's to the point where it's leather hard, and I'm ready to finish it up as far as turning it over, pulling it off the bat. I've already wired under it. I did that yesterday, and so I see I can just pick it up. It's self-supporting. It's dry enough that it supports itself without distorting. Now I can turn it back over on the wheel head and get it centered. And now what I want to do is finish this bottom off, excuse me, and add a foot to it. Okay, first thing, I'm going to clean up this bottom a little bit. I've got a little bit of a ridge here. I'm going to take that off and smooth this bottom off. Yeah, I'll cut the drain holes in it, and then add a foot ring to it. Now you can throw, there's different ways of adding the feet to a pot. You can add them on, or you can leave a thick enough bottom where you can cut away clay and cut the center away and leave a raised ridge, which becomes your foot. To me, that is more time consuming and not something that I like to do. I have done it. I do it occasionally on smaller pots, but it's not something that I normally do. I'll show you how I add the feet. and use the wheel to do it. Now you could hand build feet and add them, or you can do what I'm going to do, which is to add a coil around the bottom of it and attach it. Just smoothing this bottom off, smoothing my marks on the side here, and I'll take my needle tool and cut a drain hole. Yeah, I could use that tool that we used on the extruded pieces or the slab pieces. In other words, just cookie cutter it out. But this is pretty quick, and I can use, just use the wheel to do it. And just smoothing that. I use a pretty toothy clay, which means it's a pretty rough clay. It's a stoneware. Obviously has a lot of iron in it. That's where the kind of reddish brown color comes from. You see my pots after they're fired, they're kind of rusty, tannish, orangish brown. Kind of varies a little bit depending on where it is in the kiln and so forth. But it has a lot of tooth to it, or grittiness to it. Now, again, I'm going to use an extruder, but this is a little smaller one. Well, handheld, it's kind of like a caulking gun. I've seen people on YouTube that would actually build one out of a caulking gun. This one is commercially produced. Feed the clay in. Again, I've got a die with a small opening in it, just a hole. Screw that on. Getting ahead of myself a little bit here.
Oh, you forgot to
Yeah.
score it and everything.
I would normally do this before I extruded it, but same results. I'm just going to score that edge. Now this clay that I just extruded is really fresh, so I found that I can get away with this. I'm putting a little water on there, and then we'll take this coil and lay it as even as I can around that edge. I just cut through that. Normally I'd use my knife, but it's somewhere else.
It works the same way. I saw how you cut it just now. It kind of stuck in a different way. It didn't cut this.
Yeah, I didn't cut this way. I cut it at an angle. And when the wheel turns, the clay's gonna
Kind of push back in.
slip by it. Whereas if I cut this way, it would feed into it, and I might catch that and actually
peel
pull
it
it
off.
apart. This way it'll slip by my fingers. I take a sponge, turn the wheel on kind of slow, and wet it first, and then steady it up, even it up with these fingers. And then I began to kind of squeeze it down, in and out all at the same time, which basically forces it against the bottom of the pot and makes sure that it attaches. And then I can kind of shape that if I want to. Now normally what I would do is let this dry a little while so that this part that I just added stiffened up, and then I would either take a knife or something like this trimming tool and cut openings in it. And those can vary. You can have as many as you want. I usually do 4. Some people do 3 and have 3 kind of feet. I usually do 4 and have 4 feet or openings in it. It kind of depends. At that time I would also take my tool and make the wiring openings. Okay, this is how I put an oval together. Now I threw the ring a while ago, and I don't know how you're going to edit them together, but anyway, through this ring over here, and now this one was obviously thrown earlier. It's become a leather hard. I made it into an oval, and all I do is just take it off of the bat and kind of pull it out. And you know, I have some what's the word I'm looking for? Gridded devices that I can put this on. In other words, just a board with a grid on it, and I can put it on there and get over it and kind of look and see if it's somewhat symmetrical. So once I get it to the shape that I like it, I just let it dry a little bit more. This is a slab that, again, was made earlier. You can see it's somewhat stiff, leather hard, and so it's ready to go on here. Let me do this. Okay. Be rocking. Okay, so now lay that. Make sure that I've got you know, enough clay around it. And again, I'm just going to take any kind of tool, pencil will work, anything. All I'm doing is making a little line, scoring a little line around the diameter or edge of that rather, and so that I can see where the edge is going to be. I'm going to take my scoring tool and score that edge, or just inside that edge. Okay, take this, flip it over, and score the bottom of it. Okay, and what's in this? This. Press that down, make sure that I've got good contact between them, and then we'll put a little extra moisture on the inside. And then take my rib and smooth that seam. And go back to,
Yeah, I was just gonna say you didn't really add a whole bunch of clay to the inside when you did that just now. You kind of used what is extra on that.
yeah, when you throw, usually the bottom, right where it attaches to the bat, is a little thicker. Your finger doesn't get under there, so it leaves a little flare at the bottom.
Yeah, so that extra
so
clay
I add
was
that flare, make that flare blend into the bottom.
just
here.
the perfect amount of clay to
Yeah.
blend it.
Yeah, okay, I'm just going to take this fettling knife and cut right against the edge of this pot to separate it from the excess slab.
I'd forgotten that the slab was leather hard enough for you to lift it up just now like that. Kind of surprised me a little bit.
Just smoothing that edge off, making that seam a little cleaner where I cut it loose. So now I'm ready to cut the drain holes and place the feet on it. So there's all kind of devices. I found this a few years ago. It's made by a company, and it's really made for potters, and they call it a decorating disc. But if you threw a plate, for instance, and you wanted to do a pattern on there and make it symmetrical and have it 4 quarters, or however we want to divide it up, so it's lined off for you. And so what I do is just take this and center it as best I can. So this size pot, I'd probably put 2 holes in it, so I'll put one there, and I'm going to mark where my feet are going to go, so to get even spacing on them. Okay, for feet again, it's really varied, and you've got so many options you can do. But for sake of time, what I'm going to do, I've cut some little strips of clay out, and I'm going to get those all the same length. These are probably about 3.5 inches long. They're leather hard, and I'm going to bend them a little bit, so I want to rehydrate them a little bit. So I want them to go with the curvature of the pot. Everything looks pretty good there. So I'm gonna just make a mark here, the ends of each of them. So anyway, score those and add them together. Just work your way around that, making sure it's good contact. And we'll clean the ends of these up a little bit. I like to kind of bevel those ends about a 45-degree angle. Smoothing these in using the handle of the knife to put a little pressure on it. Again, I like to put one on the oval at the end. Again, so that if you get a lot of extra water in it, tilt it and it will drain out that hole. Okay, that's pretty much it at this point. Other than once it dries a little bit more, probably come in here and do a little more finishing work just to smooth out any little rough spots.